The wind carried the smell of burned sage and blood. A thin coat of frost laced the tops of the brittle grass, crackling under her worn boots as she walked. Her skirt was torn above one knee, caked with mud and something darker. The sky overhead was a dull sheet of pewter, neither storming nor clear, just watching, still. Like it didn't care what happened next. Mara didn't remember falling. One moment she was walking, the next her palms scraped ice-covered stone, and her jaw struck the earth. She tasted copper. When she pushed herself up, the baby began to cry. He was bundled tight to her chest, his tiny fists thrashing beneath the thin shawl she'd wrapped them both in. The other child, her older girl, stood a few feet back, her arms clutching a sack nearly as large as she was. Her face was pale, her mouth open but silent. The wind rattled the prairie grass, and the child didn't move. Mara rose slowly, spine crackling, pain firing down her hips and into her knees. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been cried into the ground over the last few days. Instead, she gripped the baby tighter, adjusted her stance, and kept moving. The homestead had burned. It hadn't been much to begin with: 2 rooms, a lean-to, a narrow fence around a broken garden, but it was all they'd had. The men who came through wore badges, but not the kind that protected anyone. They said the land had never truly belonged to her late husband. They'd laughed when she begged. One had stroked her daughter's hair with a ringed finger before she lunged at him with a hatchet. She missed. He didn't. They left them alive, and she didn't know if that was kindness or cruelty. By morning, smoke curled into the sky behind them, and Mara was walking. She didn't know where, just away. Away with what little she could carry. Away with 2 children who didn't know they had no one left. They'd walked for 2 days, maybe 3. Time stopped when you stopped being someone. Ahead, across the next rise, the land opened like a wound. Broken fence posts, an old cattle gate swinging on one hinge, a wagon half buried in weeds. And further still, a house not big, but standing. Gray planks weathered soft. A chimney smoking faintly. A porch with a rocking chair leaned back as if someone had just stood up from it. She should have kept going. But her legs were trembling, and her breasts ached with milk she didn't have. Her lips cracked when she tried to lick them. The little girl finally spoke. "Mama?" Mara stopped. Her throat worked, but no sound came. A dog barked. She looked up. A man stepped from the side of the house, rifle slung across one shoulder, the weight of it casual. He had a hat pulled low and a coat buttoned wrong. His face was shadowed, but his gait was slow, deliberate. Not threatening. Not yet. The girl clutched her mother's skirt. The baby whimpered, then hiccuped a sob. The man stopped about 10 paces from them. Wind shifted dust between them. He looked at Mara. Not her body, not her torn clothes or bleeding knee. Just her eyes. And he said nothing. She almost collapsed. Instead, her voice came out hoarse, the syllables jagged. "We have no one left." The man's face didn't change. Not at first. His eyes moved once, to the girl, then the baby, then back to Mara. "You have me," he said. It wasn't warm. It wasn't tender. It was flat, like a fence post driven into hard ground. But it held. She didn't understand. He turned, nodded once toward the house. "Come on then." She didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't believe it. He walked back toward the house, not looking to see if she followed, just trusting that she would, or not, as if he'd done what he could and that was all. Mara stood there, a long moment. Then she shifted the baby's weight and moved forward. The girl followed, hand in hers. The porch creaked. The door swung open. Inside smelled of old tobacco and coffee grounds, and the warmth cut through her like a knife. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. He pointed to a chair, pulled another near the stove, set a kettle on. Silence filled the room, thick and pulsing. And for the first time in days, Mara let herself breathe. The children slept that first night, like stones dropped into a well. The girl curled near the stove with a threadbare quilt tucked under her chin. The baby was in a drawer lined with flannel shirts, his tiny chest rising and falling like the breath of a mouse. Mara sat upright in the hard-backed chair, her boots still on, fingers wrapped tight around a chipped enamel mug. Steam rose from it, but she couldn't taste the tea. The man hadn't spoken again after letting them in. He'd gone about making a fire, checking the doors, feeding a dog she hadn't noticed at first. Then he sat in the corner, cleaning his rifle with slow, patient strokes. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't offer comfort. He simply existed beside her, and that was the closest thing to kindness she'd been given in weeks. When he finally stood and moved toward the stairs, he paused just long enough to say, "Take the bed tonight. I'll sleep up top." Mara looked up. "Why?" He didn't answer, just climbed the narrow stairs and disappeared. The bed was too soft, too warm. She lay on top of the quilt, not under it, staring at the ceiling until light broke through the cracks. Come morning, she helped herself to water from the pump out back. Her hands went red from the cold. She washed the baby with a rag, changed him on the kitchen table. When the girl stirred, she fed her half a biscuit she'd hidden in her coat lining. They all looked thinner than they should. The man was already outside, chopping wood near the shed, the sharp thunk of his axe breaking through the dawn. Mara watched from the window a while, unsure what to do with herself. She didn't ask to stay, didn't know if she even could. But when he came back in and hung his coat by the door, he glanced at her just once and said, "You cook?" She nodded. "Flowers in the bin, potatoes under the bench, eggs if the hens are kind today." He picked up a bucket and walked back out. That was how it started. She fried potatoes that morning, over-salted and scorched on one side, but he ate them without a word. When the baby cried, he nodded toward the cradle she hadn't seen tucked under the stairs. When the girl asked shyly where the outhouse was, he handed her a shawl and pointed. By evening, she had peeled turnips, swept the front room, and stacked kindling by the stove. He fixed the porch rail, brushed and fed the horses, let the girl scatter corn for the hens. They moved around each other like strangers caught in the same storm, cautious, quiet, with just enough warmth to keep them from freezing. He said his name was Eli on the third day. Nothing more, no history, no questions, just a name dropped into conversation like a coin on a table. When she told him hers, he nodded once and didn't repeat it. The days were short, the light brittle. Each morning, she waited to be asked to leave. Each night, she was still there. On the fifth day, she offered to help with the horses. He looked at her boots. "You ride?" "I did." "You scared?" "Of what?" "Getting bucked. Getting hurt." "I already am." He studied her a moment, then led her to the corral. The mare was mottled gray, with kind eyes and a limp in her left hind leg. Mara stroked her flank, breathing in the warmth, the smell of hay and old leather. She hadn't touched a horse since before her husband died. Eli handed her a brush without a word. That night, over stew and silence, he asked how long she'd been walking before she got here. She hesitated. 3 days, maybe 4. "I don't remember." "You shouldn't have made it." "I know." He chewed slowly, then looked at her, real direct for the first time. "You're strong." She didn't know how to answer that. So she said, "I'm tired." He nodded. "That, too." Then the baby whimpered, and she rose to tend him, but her knees buckled halfway up. Eli caught her by the elbow before she hit the floor. It was the first time he'd touched her. He didn't hold on long, just long enough to make sure she stayed up. But the steadiness of his hand left a heat in her skin that lingered. Neither of them spoke. The wind howled through the boards that night. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote cried out. But inside, it was warm. And for the first time, she slept without hearing fire. Join this journey, where broken souls find strength again. Subscribe, and never miss the next chapter. By the second week, Mara had begun to remember her own name without flinching. She rose before dawn, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and fed the chickens without needing to be told. The girl helped her stir batter for biscuits and swept ash from the hearth while the baby gnawed his fists and watched them both with wide, solemn eyes. Eli worked sunup to sundown, mending fence lines and tending stock, fixing a roof beam that sagged under snow weight. He didn't hover. He didn't tell her what to do. But he noticed the small things, how she favored her left leg, how the girl kept waking with nightmares, how the baby clung to her like he was still inside her. On the 9th day, she found a row of nails hung behind the door, one for her coat, one for the girl's shawl, one for a scarf she didn't remember owning. Eli had hammered them in without a word. She ran her fingers over the smooth, fresh wood. Something about it made her chest ache. The land stayed cold. The wind was sharp and mean, rattling the windows at night like a drunk trying to come in. But the rhythm of life settled them. There was always something to do, and when your hands were busy, your mind stayed quieter. Eli showed her how to hold a rifle again, not like a lesson, more like an offer. He handed it to her out in the pasture, where the snow had thinned and the horizon ran forever. She hesitated. "I missed," she said. His brow furrowed. "What?" "The man. One of them. I tried to kill him. I missed." Her voice cracked like brittle ice. Eli stared across the plain. "You won't. Next time." She raised the rifle, shoulders trembling, and fired at a rotted fence post. The echo came back slow and long. The bullet missed wide. He didn't laugh, didn't correct her, just nodded and loaded the next round. That night, after the children were asleep, she found him in the barn brushing down the mare. He didn't turn when she stepped in. "Why did you let us stay?" she asked. His brush slowed. "Didn't seem right, sending you off. There's plenty of folks who wouldn't care." "I ain't plenty of folks." She watched him a long moment. "You lose someone?" He nodded. "Just once." "Wife?" He shook his head. "Child." He paused. The brush stopped altogether. "Brother. Died in the war. He was younger. Got himself shot outside Memphis. I was supposed to bring him home. I didn't." Mara leaned against the stall, arms crossed to hide her shaking. "I lost 2 brothers, same year. One to scarlet fever, one to bad debt and a bullet in a saloon. I'm sorry." "Don't be. World don't owe us anything." She looked up. "But you didn't have to take us in." Eli turned to face her. His eyes were clearer than she expected. "You came walking out of nowhere with fire in your eyes and death on your heels. You had those children wrapped in nothing but courage. I've seen cowards with rifles run from less. You didn't blink. That's why." Mara felt something tighten in her throat. He looked away again, brushing slow. "And maybe I got tired of eating alone." The quiet between them was heavy, but not hard, like river stones worn smooth. Mara stepped forward and reached for the mare's bridle, brushing her hand along the horse's cheek. Her fingers grazed Eli's for a second, barely more than a breath, but he didn't pull away. Outside, snow started falling again, slow and steady. "I don't know what's next," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "You're here now." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even comfort. But it was the first thing in a long time that felt real enough to hold. She stood there beside him until the lantern burned low, and when they walked back to the house, she didn't walk behind him. "These roads are hard, but they lead somewhere worth finding. Subscribe to travel further." She walked beside. Spring didn't come all at once. It crept in like a secret, first in the softening of the soil, then in the slow drip from the eaves. The hens laid more. The mare began shedding her coat. One morning, the girls spotted a crocus pushing up through the frost-bitten ground and stared at it like it was a miracle. Mara had started sleeping through the night. Not always, not fully, but the panic no longer chased her down in her dreams. Her hands still trembled some mornings, and there were moments, brief, sudden, where she'd look at the baby and forget what day it was or whether they were safe, but the space between those moments grew wider. Eli never said much, but she began to learn him in pieces. He read at night by lamplight, usually the Bible or tattered almanacs. He had a long scar down his left arm that he never talked about. He hummed sometimes while he worked, mostly old folk songs without words, and though he kept to himself, he always left the last biscuit for the girl. One evening, they repaired the barn roof together. She held the boards steady while he hammered, her fingers numbed from the wind. He didn't say a word the whole time, but when they were finished, and she climbed down off the ladder with stiff knees and chapped hands, he held out a canteen without looking at her. She drank deep and handed it back. Their fingers brushed again. "You could have left," he said. She looked at him. "When?" "That first week, or after. You could have taken the children and gone looking." "Looking where?" He shrugged. "Anywhere." She stared off toward the hills. "I used to think about California, about oranges. A neighbor once told me there were trees out there where you could pick fruit right from the branch. No frost, no rot. You think you'd be happy there?" "I don't know what that word means anymore." Eli was quiet for a long while. Then he said, "Happiness ain't always a place. Sometimes it's just not being alone." They started eating supper together every night, all four of them, at the rough pine table. The girl made napkins from flour sacks. Eli fixed the baby's cradle so it didn't creak. Mara mended Eli's shirts without asking. One afternoon, she found a tin box under the floorboards while sweeping. Inside were old photographs, sepia-toned, creased from years of hands folding and unfolding. One showed a younger Eli with his arm around a dark-haired boy. Another showed a woman, older, with stern eyes and a wildness around her mouth that reminded Mara of herself. She didn't ask about them. She left the box where she found it. That night, he set an extra log on the fire and said, "My mother's name was Ada. She died giving birth to that boy. My brother, the one who didn't make it home." Mara waited. "He was the better of us, smarter, quicker, more decent. But I came back, and he didn't. That's all there is to say." She shook her head. "There's more. There's always more." But she didn't push. She just sat beside him. When the baby cried, she rose to tend him, and Eli reached out without thinking, steadied her elbow as she stood. His hand lingered half a second too long, and for the first time, he looked embarrassed. "Sorry," he murmured. "Don't be." She didn't pull away. The days lengthened. The air smelled of thawing earth and wet pine. Mara began to take the girl walking in the mornings, while Eli worked the far fields. They'd return with wild onions and bruised knees, cheeks flushed pink from wind and laughter. One evening, Mara stood out by the fence, arms crossed against the cooling air. She watched the horizon and listened to the hush of the land breathing itself back to life. Eli walked up beside her, not close, just near enough. She spoke without turning. "You ever think about starting over? Every day. What stops you?" He paused. "Fear, guilt, habit." She nodded. "Same." He studied her a moment. "You think staying here is starting over?" "I think it might be surviving. For now." Eli didn't speak again, but after a while, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She let it stay. Late April brought a letter. It came by horse, delivered by a boy no older than 12, who looked around the cabin like he didn't expect anyone to live this far out. Eli gave him a heel of bread and a sip of coffee before the boy disappeared back down the trail. Mara stood at the table, the envelope limp in her hand. Her name was written on the front, her full name. Not the married one, the one from before. She didn't open it. Not until the children were asleep, not until the dishes were washed, not until Eli had gone outside to smoke. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, folded in quarters. Her brother-in-law's handwriting, heavy and dark, like it always had been. "They say you're alive. Some neighbor saw you walking with the kids. I don't know where you've been. I don't care. But the land wasn't yours to begin with, and it sure as hell ain't now. If you try to come back, I'll have you hauled in for trespass. I buried my brother, and I'm done with your ghost." No greeting, no signature. Mara read it twice, then folded it back up and set it on the fire. It curled and blackened without a sound. Eli came in a few minutes later. He stopped when he saw her standing there, her shoulders stiff, hands clenched. "What was it?" he asked. "Nothing," she said, voice flat. He didn't press, just waited. She turned to him, slow. "He said, if I come back, he'll have me arrested." Eli's jaw tightened. "He won't." "He could. You're not going back." She looked down at her hands. "It was never mine. None of it." He stepped closer. "You're not leaving." "I'm not yours either," she said, not harsh, just true. His voice was low. "I didn't ask you to be." Silence stretched. The wind howled against the eaves, and somewhere in the barn, the mare stamped her feet. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. "You're not running." "I don't want to be pitied." "You're not." Her eyes rose to meet his. "Then what am I?" Eli studied her like she was the only thing moving in a still world. Then he reached out, took her hand not softly, but steady, and placed it flat against his chest. "You're here," he said. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed alone. They didn't speak much. Their bodies did the talking quietly, reverently, like people who'd known loss too intimately to treat anything carelessly. She traced the scar on his arm. He kissed the hollow beneath her ear, where her pulse stuttered like a trapped bird. When she woke just before dawn, the baby was crying. She sat up, half ashamed, half afraid to find Eli gone. But he was there, rocking the child in slow, practiced rhythm, whispering something low and soft Mara couldn't hear. She watched him a long time from the bed, her heart cracked wide open. The days turned gold and green. The girl found a fawn in the brush and named it Clover. The baby began to crawl. Mara started planting peas, beets, onions, all things that could survive poor soil and late frost. The dirt got under her nails, in her pores, deep into her skin, like it belonged there. Eli added shelves to the cabin, a second crib, built a bench beneath the window where the sun hit just right in the morning. There was still silence, but it was the comfortable kind. Until one morning a stranger rode up. Mara was kneading bread. Eli was in the shed. The man came up slow, a hard look in his eyes. His hat sat low, and his coat was the kind worn by officials. "Ma'am," he said, tipping the brim. "You, Mara Lindsley?" She didn't flinch, just nodded once. "I've got orders out of Junction. Says you're squatting land you don't own. Been a complaint filed." She felt the girl behind her go still. The man looked past her, toward the fields, the shed. "You've got a choice. Come with me peaceable, or stay and face it when the judge sends someone meaner." Eli came out then, wiping grease from his hands. He stood beside her. "That so?" he said. The man shifted in his saddle. "Just delivering the warning." Eli looked at Mara. "What do you want me to do?" Her voice was clear. "I'm not leaving." Eli nodded once, turned back to the rider. "Then you can tell whoever sent you," he said, "that she's got more right to this land than any name on paper." The man spit into the dirt. "You willing to stake your claim on that?" "I already have." The stranger paused, adjusted his reins. He looked at Mara again, longer this time, then turned his horse around. He didn't look back. That night, as the fire burned low, Eli took Mara's hand in his and held it like it was something fragile. She leaned against him, heart steady. "You still think I'm not yours?" he asked. Mara shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, I think I was always meant to be." Summer rose up hot and slow, draping the valley in light thick as honey. The hills baked under the sun, crickets screamed in the dry grass, and the air turned still enough some days that even the leaves stopped rustling. The children darkened under it, barefoot and sun-browned, their laughter carrying over the fields like music. Mara grew stronger. Her arms no longer trembled when she carried water, and her back held straight as she hoed rows beneath the punishing heat. The work didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like building, something lasting, something real. Eli added a lean-to for shade, fixed the creek fence so the calves wouldn't wander, started calling the baby Little Man, in a voice that always made Mara's throat ache. They didn't speak of the letter again, nor of the man on horseback, but Mara kept her rifle clean, and Eli never strayed far without leaving word. She knew trouble could still come, but it no longer ruled her. One evening, she found Eli sitting on the porch with the girl in his lap, showing her how to braid leather. The girl was quiet, focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. Eli's voice was soft, patient. Mara watched from the doorway, apron dusted with flour, her hands stilled against her sides. Later, when the stars came out and the air cooled, they lay together beneath a quilt stitched long before either of them knew what grief would cost. She ran her fingers through his hair, slow and easy. "I don't feel like a ghost anymore," she whispered. "You never were," he said. She kissed the space where his shoulder met his neck. "Do you ever think we were meant to find each other?" "I think we were meant to survive. The rest is grace. But peace is never perfect." Word came again, this time folded into a note nailed to the barn door. "You've had your season. Leave by fall or we'll come ourselves." No name, no mark, but she knew the hand. Sharp strokes, angry ink. Her brother-in-law hadn't let it go. Eli burned it in the stove without a word. "You think he'll follow through?" she asked, arms crossed, teeth tight with worry. He didn't answer at first. Then, "If he does, he'll regret it." The heat in his voice surprised her, not fire, not rage, just a quiet certainty that settled into her bones. Still, Mara didn't want more blood. She didn't want her children raised in the shadow of fear. That night, after the children were asleep, she took the deed from where Eli kept it wrapped in oilcloth beneath the floorboards. It was old, ink-faded, but Eli's father had bought this land fair and clean, and no one had ever challenged it before. "It's yours," she said. "You don't have to fight this fight." Eli took her hand and pressed the deed into her palm. "It's ours." Mara looked at him, steady. "Then let's end it." They hitched the wagon at dawn and made the ride into town. Mara, Eli, the baby bundled in her arms, and the girl bouncing with nerves. It had been nearly a year since she last set foot among strangers. The courthouse was plain, squat, sun-bleached. Inside, the judge sat behind a desk, surprised to see them. Mara spoke with a voice clear and calm. She told him the truth, nothing more. That her husband had died. That the land had been contested by those who didn't understand or didn't want to believe what it meant for a woman to claim it. That she wasn't here to beg, she was here to stand. Eli laid the deed on the desk, signed his name beside his father's in slow, deliberate strokes. The judge looked between them. He asked no questions, just nodded and said, "It's yours, legally and proper. I'll make the record." When they stepped out into the sun, Mara didn't cry, but she held the baby tighter, and when Eli reached for her hand, she didn't let go for a long time. Fall came golden and crisp, the sky wide and cloudless. They harvested beets and corn, put up jars of preserves, stacked firewood chest high. The girl started school at the church house. The baby learned to walk across the packed dirt floor, arms out, face full of stubborn joy. One evening, as the sun slid behind the hills, Eli brought out a small box. Inside was a ring, nothing grand, just a band of gold worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said. "Figured it might mean more than a promise." Mara stared down at it, throat thick. "I don't need a wedding," she said. He looked at her gently. "Neither do I, but I need you." She took the ring with both hands and slid it on, her fingers trembling. "I'm not walking away again," she said. "Then we'll walk forward," Eli replied. The first snow came early. They watched it fall from the porch, her hand in his, the baby asleep inside, the girl chasing flakes with her mouth open wide. Mara leaned her head against Eli's shoulder. They had built nothing fancy, no riches, no grandeur. But they had each other, and for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. If this story touched a hidden place in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and walk with us on the dusty road ahead.